There is a moment every man has lived through at least once. You meet a woman. Something shifts between you. The energy is undeniable, the connection is real, and for a brief stretch of time, it feels like the world has rearranged itself in your favor. She laughs at what you say. She leans in when you speak. She finds reasons to be near you. And then, without warning, without explanation, she pulls back. The texts slow down. The warmth cools. She seems distracted, distant, almost untouchable. You replay every conversation looking for the mistake. You search your memory for the moment you said the wrong thing or moved too fast or too slow. And yet you find nothing. Nothing that explains why the woman who seems so present has suddenly gone quiet. Most men, at this point, make their first fatal error. They assume the silence means indifference. They assume the distance means the feeling is gone. They flood her with messages. They push harder. They perform more, give more, explain more, and in doing so, they destroy the very thing they were trying to protect. What they did not understand, what no one ever taught them, is that a woman's silence is not always absence. Sometimes it is the loudest signal she knows how to send. And if you know how to read it through the lens of Stoic philosophy, it changes everything. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private journals, words never meant for any audience but himself, that the obstacle is the path. He was not talking about romantic relationships. He was talking about life, about the nature of human resistance, and what it reveals. But the principle translates with startling precision into the terrain of love. When a woman who is deeply emotionally invested in you begins to pull back, she is not creating an obstacle to punish you. She is revealing something true about herself, about the depth of what she feels, and about whether you are the kind of man who can stand steady when the ground shifts beneath him. The obstacle she presents is, in fact, the path to earning her trust at the deepest level. Stoicism has always been a philosophy of reading reality without the distortion of fear or desire. The Stoics were not cold men. They were not emotional cowards who suppressed feeling. They were men who trained themselves to see clearly, to understand the difference between what a thing appears to be and what it actually is. That distinction matters enormously when you are standing in front of a woman you care about who has gone quiet, and you are trying to figure out what it means. Epictetus, a man who was born a slave and became one of the most powerful philosophical minds in human history, taught one foundational truth above all others. He called it the dichotomy of control. Some things are within our power. Some things are not. Our judgments, our desires, our responses, these are ours. The behavior of another person, including the woman you love, is not. What Epictetus understood, and what most modern men have never been taught, is that attempting to control what belongs outside your authority is not strength. It is panic dressed up as effort. And women feel the difference immediately. When a man panics in the face of a woman's silence, he reveals something about himself that no amount of charm or status can cover. He reveals that his emotional stability is contingent on her behavior. He reveals that his sense of self requires her validation to remain intact. This is precisely what Epictetus warned against, placing your peace of mind in the hands of externals. A woman who is deeply in love with you is not testing you consciously in most cases. But she is watching. She is watching to see if you are a man who can hold himself together when she cannot give you reassurance. And what you do in that silence will determine more about the relationship than almost anything else that follows. Here is what the silence actually means when a woman is deeply in love. It means she is afraid. Not afraid of you, necessarily, but afraid of herself. Afraid of how much she feels. Afraid of what it would mean to fully surrender to something that could hurt her. Women have been hurt before. Every woman alive has loved someone who did not deserve it, who took what she gave and left without ceremony. The emotional memory of that kind of wound does not disappear when something real comes along. If anything, it gets louder. The more a woman feels, the more vivid that memory becomes, and the more instinctively she pulls back to protect herself from repeating it. This is not manipulation. It is survival. It is the ancient human mechanism of self-preservation operating in the most intimate theater of life. And if you understand that her silence is born from vulnerability rather than indifference, your entire posture toward it changes. Instead of reacting with anxiety, you respond with steadiness. Instead of flooding her with noise to fill the quiet, you hold your ground with the quiet confidence of a man who understands that the storm is not about him, and who refuses to be moved by what he cannot control. Seneca wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality. There is no arena in modern life where this is more brutally true than romantic uncertainty. A woman goes quiet for 2 days and a man's mind builds an entire catastrophe. She has lost interest. She found someone else. You said something wrong at dinner last Tuesday. You are being replaced. You were never enough. The mind, left untrained and unsupervised, will fill silence with its worst fears, and then it will treat those fears as facts. It will act on them. It will send the desperate message. It will demand reassurance. It will make the very outcome it fears most inevitable by reaching for it with shaking hands. Stoic philosophy offers a different instruction. Before you act, examine the thought. Ask yourself whether what you believe is actually true, or whether it is your anxiety projecting its own reflection onto a situation that may be far simpler than the story you are telling yourself. 9 times out of 10, the silence is not what you think it is. 9 times out of 10, you are not losing her. You are being observed. And the man who holds his composure under observation, who does not flood or collapse or demand, is the man who passes the only test that actually matters in these moments. This channel, The Stoic Edge, exists for exactly this reason. To give men the philosophical tools that turn ordinary emotional situations into moments of genuine self-mastery. If what you are reading right now is landing somewhere real in you, subscribe to the channel right now. There is a full library of content built on Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca, applied directly to the life of a man who wants to be stronger, clearer, and more grounded than the world around him gives him credit for. Hit the subscribe button and stay in this conversation because what comes next goes even deeper. There is a concept in Stoic philosophy called the ruling faculty of the mind, the inner governor that determines how a man interprets and responds to everything that happens around him. The Stoics believe that this faculty, when properly trained, becomes the source of an unshakable identity. It becomes the thing that holds when everything else moves. In the context of a woman who has gone quiet, your inner governor is what determines whether you respond with dignity or dissolve into reactivity. And here is the part that matters most. Women are extraordinarily sensitive to whether a man's inner governor is intact or not. Not because they are running some calculated evaluation, but because they are emotional beings whose nervous systems are finely tuned to the energy a man carries. When you are anxious, she feels it. When you are needy, she senses it before you say a word. When your self-worth is leaking through the cracks of your composure, her body responds to it long before her mind has named what is happening. And conversely, when you are genuinely grounded, when your identity does not require her approval to remain solid, she feels that too. That groundedness is not just attractive. To a woman who is deeply in love and quietly terrified of it, a grounded man is the only safe place she knows how to trust. Let us talk about what silence in the context of deep love actually looks like from the inside, from her perspective. When a woman is falling hard for someone, her inner world becomes a kind of turbulence. The feelings are not tidy or controllable. She may feel joy and dread in the same moment. She may think about you constantly and simultaneously wish she could think about you less. She may pull back not because she wants to create distance but because she needs to get her own bearings, to understand what she is feeling before she gives more of herself. This is not a game. It is an emotionally honest response to an emotionally overwhelming experience. Epictetus would recognize this immediately. He understood that every person operates according to their own inner logic, and that judging another person's behavior without understanding that logic leads to nothing but frustration and error. When you interpret her silence through the lens of your own fear, you see rejection. When you interpret it through the lens of genuine curiosity and philosophical calm, you see a woman who is overwhelmed by the depth of her own feeling. Those two interpretations lead to completely different responses, and completely different outcomes. There is also something worth understanding about the architecture of feminine attraction. It does not work the way masculine attraction works. A man typically knows within moments whether he is attracted to a woman. It is direct, immediate, often visual, and relatively uncomplicated in its initial form. A woman's attraction is built over time through the accumulation of emotional data. She is watching how you handle pressure. She is watching whether your behavior is consistent, or whether it changes based on her responsiveness to you. She is watching what you do with your time, your ambitions, your friendships. She is watching whether you are who you appear to be, or whether the version of you she first met was a performance that collapses the moment you feel insecure. Marcus Aurelius was not speaking about attraction when he wrote about virtue as something practiced continuously, not proclaimed, but the principle lands here with full force. The man who is genuinely building himself, who has real purpose, real discipline, real inner life, does not need a woman's attention to feel complete. And that completeness is, paradoxically, exactly what draws her deeper. Absence of neediness is not coldness. It is not indifference. It is the signal that she is dealing with a man who has himself, and who therefore has something real to offer her. Now let us go deeper into the practical reality. What do you actually do when she goes quiet? The Stoic answer is not complicated, but it requires something most men are not practiced in: the willingness to be still. You do not flood her inbox. You do not send the message 3 times in a row. You do not manufacture reasons to reach out just to test whether she responds. You live your life. You focus on your work, your health, your purpose. You let her come back in her own time. And if she does not come back, you accept that with the same equanimity with which you would accept any external event outside your control, not with forced indifference, but with the genuine recognition that you cannot own another person's choices, and that chasing what withdraws is the surest way to confirm the worst fears she already has about giving herself to someone. Seneca said that a man who is master of himself fears nothing from the outside. That is the posture. Not aggression. Not stonewalling. Not performing disinterest as a tactic. Genuine self-possession. The kind that does not require a woman's participation to be maintained. There is a difference, and it is critical, between a man who is detached as a strategy and a man who is grounded as a way of being. Women can feel that difference in their bones. If you are pulling back to make her chase you, if the calm is manufactured and the distance is calculated, she will sense the performance underneath it. The manipulation will register even if she cannot name it. And the trust she was building toward you will begin to erode because trust cannot coexist with the feeling of being played. Genuine Stoic grounding is not a tactic. It is a condition. It is what happens when a man has done the inner work of understanding that his value does not fluctuate based on someone else's temperature. It is the result of having faced his own fears honestly, having looked at the need for validation, the anxiety about abandonment, the terror of being ordinary, and having worked through those things rather than around them. That inner work is the actual curriculum of Stoic philosophy, not the memorization of quotes. The daily, unglamorous practice of examining your own mind and choosing your response rather than being driven by impulse. Let us talk about Marcus Aurelius for a moment in a different way. Not the emperor. Not the philosopher king. The man. He lived and ruled and loved in a world that gave him every reason to be arrogant, every justification to be brittle, every temptation to measure his worth by the submission of those around him. And yet his journals reveal something else entirely, a man engaged in the continuous, honest, and often painful work of self-examination. He wrote to himself, not to be read. He corrected himself, reminded himself, challenged himself. He was a man at war with his own lesser impulses, and he chose, day after day, to return to his highest values rather than surrender to his lowest reactions. That is the model available to every man who picks up this philosophy and takes it seriously. Not a finished product. Not a man who has transcended difficulty. A man who keeps returning. Who keeps choosing. Whose character is not a performance for an audience but a discipline practiced in private, especially in those private moments when a woman he loves has gone quiet and no one is watching to see how he handles it. Here is a truth that the philosophy of Seneca clarifies with unusual precision. Every strong reaction a man has to a woman's silence is, at its root, a conversation he is having with himself about his own worth. When a man floods her inbox, he is not really reaching out to her. He is trying to quiet his own internal verdict, the one that says he is not enough, that this is about him, that he is being discarded. And the tragedy is that this internal verdict was never hers to deliver. It was always his own. The woman went quiet for reasons that belong entirely to her inner world. But the man's reaction to that silence reveals everything about his relationship with his own self-worth. Seneca was relentless on this point. The man who cannot be alone with himself in discomfort, who cannot sit in uncertainty without demanding resolution, who cannot tolerate the space between action and outcome, that man is not free. He is a slave to his own need for reassurance. And no relationship, however loving, can fix that deficit from the outside. It has to be built from within. Which is precisely what Stoicism offers, not a set of techniques, but a daily practice of building the kind of inner life that does not require external confirmation to remain standing. There is a pattern that plays out in relationships that most people never examine clearly. When a woman is deeply attached and begins to pull back, the man who reacts with anxiety confirms her deepest fear, that love will cost her her peace. That being vulnerable will result in being controlled or smothered. That this relationship, like others before it, will slowly require her to manage not just her own emotions but his as well. And so the pullback deepens. The silence stretches. What began as a moment of emotional recalibration becomes a slow exit driven not by lack of feeling but by self-preservation. The man who responds to her silence with steadiness, who does not demand, does not perform, does not collapse, gives her a completely different experience. He shows her that her emotional independence is safe with him. That she can retreat into herself without losing him. That she can have the space she needs without having to justify it or manage his reaction to it. This is enormously rare. And rarity, in the economy of human attraction, is enormously powerful. Epictetus taught that freedom is not the absence of constraint. It is the mastery of response. This is the most underrated idea in all of Stoic philosophy, and it applies here with total precision. You cannot make her come back. You cannot make her feel what she feels faster or slower or on your schedule. What you can do, what is entirely within your power, is decide who you are in this situation. You can decide to be the man who panics and loses himself in pursuit of reassurance. Or you can decide to be the man who trusts himself enough to hold still. Who trusts the connection enough to give it room. Who trusts the philosophy enough to practice it when it costs something real. That decision is your freedom. And it is the only freedom that matters in any moment when the outcome depends on another person. If you have made it this far and something in this is speaking to you, something is clicking about why the old approaches never worked and why this framework feels different, then this is your moment. Subscribe to the Stoic Edge right now. This channel is built for men who are ready to stop reacting and start governing their emotions, their relationships, their lives. Every video on this channel is a tool. Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca. Applied to real life. Applied to who you are right now and who you are becoming. Subscribe and be part of this community because the next video goes exactly where this one is pointing. Let us address something that tends to get avoided in these conversations, the ego. Specifically, the male ego and the particular way it responds to the sensation of being ignored by someone it wants. The ego does not receive silence graciously. It interprets silence as a verdict. And its immediate instinct is to appeal that verdict, to argue, to perform, to demonstrate its worth loudly enough that the silence cannot continue. This is, without exception, the wrong move. Not because strategy says so, but because it is a lie. It is a man performing confidence rather than possessing it. And a woman who is deeply in love, which means a woman who is paying close attention, sees the performance for exactly what it is. Seneca had a warning about men who were constantly managing their appearance for others. He observed that such men were never truly free because their peace was always contingent on how they were perceived. The man who is liberated from the need to manage her perception of him is the man whose presence she finds irresistible. Not because he is cold, but because he is real. His calm is not a mask. His patience is not a tactic. His security is not a performance. It is simply who he has become through the sustained practice of self-examination and self-mastery. Here is something worth sitting with. The women who love most deeply are also the women who guard most carefully. They are not cold. They are not unavailable. They are experienced. They have felt real love, and they have felt what happens when real love is placed in the wrong hands. The pullback that happens when a woman is deeply in love is often the last check she runs, not consciously, not with a checklist, but instinctively, the way you check a foundation before you build something you intend to last. She is not pushing you away. She is finding out whether you are actually solid. Marcus Aurelius wrote that you have power over your mind, not outside events. The strength he is pointing to is not the strength of force or persistence. It is the strength of knowing that your value is not determined by her response to you in this moment. That you are not diminished by her silence. That you do not need her reassurance to confirm what you already know about yourself. That is the strength she is looking for when she goes quiet. Not the strength that chases. The strength that remains. Now let us talk about what happens on the other side of this, when a man gets this right. When he holds his ground without coldness, when he maintains his own life without performing disinterest, when he meets her silence with genuine equanimity rather than manufactured distance. What happens is not always instant. Sometimes she comes back slowly, feeling her way toward him with the careful steps of someone who is used to being disappointed. But when she comes back more fully than she was before. Because the silence tested something real and found it solid. Because the man she was afraid to trust proved, without saying a word about it, that he was trustworthy. This is what Stoic philosophy produces in the arena of love when it is actually practiced rather than merely quoted. Not a cold man who never needs anyone. Not a calculating man who runs game. But a whole man, complete in himself, clear in his values, steady in his presence, who offers a woman the rarest thing she has ever been offered. A place where she does not have to manage him. Where she does not have to perform to earn his stability. Where she can be fully human, messy and uncertain and sometimes silent, and still be safe. There is a Stoic practice worth naming here because it applies directly to what we are discussing. The Stoics called it the premeditation of adversity, the act of deliberately imagining the difficult outcomes before they arrive so that when they do not catch you unprepared. Applied to relationships, this means accepting, in advance, that the person you love will sometimes be distant. Will sometimes be silent. Will sometimes need something from you that looks and feels like nothing. Will sometimes show you a version of herself that is pulled inward and unavailable. When you have already made peace with this possibility, when you have sat with it and decided in advance how you will respond, it loses its power to throw you. This is not pessimism. It is preparation. Seneca practiced it every day of his life and called it his most reliable source of tranquility. The man who has imagined the silence and decided who he will be inside of it is not rattled by the silence when it comes. He is ready. Not ready in a rigid or armored way, but ready in the deep, quiet way of a man who knows himself. Let us also address the broader pattern that this situation reflects in the lives of men who are on a path of genuine growth. The Stoics were not relationship coaches. They were men trying to understand how to live well in a world they could not control. But the philosophy they built applies everywhere human beings collide with uncertainty, which is everywhere, and nowhere more painfully than in love. What Stoicism teaches, at its root, is that your inner life is the only territory you actually own. Everything else, her feelings, her choices, the outcome of the relationship, is rented territory. You can invest in it. You can care for it. But you cannot own it, and you cannot protect it by clutching harder. The man who learns this lesson in the context of love learns it for every arena of his life. He learns it in business when a deal falls through. He learns it in friendship when someone he trusted disappoints him. He learns it in health when the body does not cooperate. The practice of releasing what cannot be controlled, not with resentment but with understanding, is the foundational skill of a life lived well. And relationships are where that practice gets its most demanding examination. There is something Marcus Aurelius returned to again and again in his journals that feels essential here. He wrote about the importance of not disturbing yourself about things that may never come to pass. He was the most powerful man in the Western world, and even he had to remind himself daily not to manufacture suffering about outcomes that had not yet arrived. He had to remind himself to stay present, to deal with what is actual rather than what is imagined. For a man sitting in the silence of a woman he loves, that instruction is everything. She has not left. She has not said it is over. She has gone quiet. That is what is actual. Everything else is the story your untrained mind is building on top of an absence of information. Stay in what is real. What is real is that she was present, she is now quiet, and you do not yet know why. What is real is that your response to this moment will determine more about the relationship than almost any other single thing. What is real is that the quality of your character, not your cleverness, not your persistence, not your ability to send the perfect message, is what is being asked for right now. There is one more dimension of this that deserves its own space, and that is the dimension of self-respect. Stoicism is unambiguous on this point. You cannot love well from a position of self-abandonment. You cannot offer genuine care, genuine presence, genuine partnership to another person if you have surrendered your own sense of self-worth in order to obtain their approval. Epictetus said that no man is free who is not master of himself. He meant this in every domain of life, including this one. The man who chases a woman's silence with increasing desperation is, at root, a man who has decided that her approval is worth more than his own dignity. And the painful truth is that this decision poisons both things simultaneously. It does not earn her respect, and it costs him his own. The Stoic instruction is not to be cold or hard or indifferent to whether love succeeds. It is to hold the love and the self-respect in both hands at the same time, either letting go of the care nor sacrificing the dignity. That balance, difficult to achieve, impossible to fake, is the most attractive thing a man can offer a woman who is paying attention. Let us go even further into the nature of what love actually requires of a man, particularly a man who has chosen Stoicism as a framework for how he moves through the world. Love is not a passive experience. It is not something that simply happens to you and asks nothing of you in return. Real love, the kind that lasts, the kind that builds something, demands that both people be more than they were before. It demands growth. It demands honesty. It demands the willingness to sit in discomfort without running from it. And it demands, above all, a commitment to the relationship that is rooted in values rather than in feelings that fluctuate by the hour. Marcus Aurelius wrote continuously about the obligation to show up fully, to resist the temptation to coast on good intentions while doing nothing with them. He applied this to governance, to philosophy, to friendship. But the principle is universal. Showing up fully in a relationship does not mean being present only when it is comfortable. It means being steady precisely when steadiness costs you something. When she is quiet and your anxiety is loud. When the reassurance you need is nowhere on offer. When the easiest thing in the world would be to react, and the only valuable thing is to hold. There is a specific kind of loneliness that a man feels when the woman he loves pulls back. It is different from ordinary loneliness because it is surrounded by what he wants. She is there, she exists, the connection is real, and yet he cannot reach her. This particular loneliness has a name in the philosophy of men who have studied human suffering carefully. It is the loneliness of uncertainty. Not the clean loneliness of absence, but the murky loneliness of proximity without access. It is, in many ways, the hardest kind to bear with grace. Seneca wrote about the nature of uncertainty with unusual compassion for a philosopher known for his severity. He said that the mind which is not resolved is more tormented by its own restlessness than by any external cause. The torment is not the situation. The torment is the unresolved mind thrashing inside the situation. And the resolution he pointed toward was not the resolution of the situation itself, it was the resolution of the man's inner posture toward whatever the outcome might be. When a man can genuinely say, with every fiber of his being, that he will be whole regardless of what she decides, that is when the loneliness loses its power to devour him. Here is what no one talks about when they talk about Stoic philosophy and love. The Stoics were not advocating for a life without deep feeling. They were not building a framework for emotional numbness disguised as wisdom. Seneca loved his wife Paulina with a depth and sincerity that shines through his letters across 2,000 years. Marcus Aurelius mourned the deaths of his children. He buried several of them, with a grief that was fully human and fully felt. Epictetus spoke about the love between parent and child as one of the most natural and powerful forces in human experience. What distinguished these men was not the absence of feeling. It was the presence of choice inside the feeling. They felt everything. And then they chose how to carry it. They chose whether the feeling would govern their behavior or whether their values would govern their behavior, with the feeling acknowledged and honored but not given the keys. That is the actual teaching. Feel it. Name it. Let it move through you. And then choose, from your values rather than your fear, how you will act. That is not coldness. That is the highest form of human self-mastery. Let us talk about what it looks like in real terms when a man has actually integrated this teaching, when it is not theory anymore but lived experience. He wakes up on the third day of her silence, and his mind immediately goes there. He feels the pull toward his phone. He feels the story forming, the catastrophizing, the worst case, the verdict. And instead of acting on that pull, he pauses. He breathes. He names what he is feeling without judging it. He acknowledges the anxiety as a signal, not a directive. And then he puts the phone down and goes to do the thing he was going to do anyway. The workout, the work, the project, the walk. Not as a performance for her. Not as a tactic to make her think he does not care. But because his life does not stop in the gap between her messages. Because he is a man with a life worth living, and living it fully is both his right and his responsibility. She may or may not feel that from a distance. She may or may not come back faster or more warmly because of it. But he will feel it. He will feel what it is to choose his values over his fear. And that feeling, that small, quiet, genuinely earned victory over his own lesser impulse, is the actual building block of the man that Stoicism is trying to create. One decision at a time. One silence at a time. One moment of choosing dignity over desperation at a time. Marcus Aurelius had a phrase he returned to frequently in moments of difficulty. One word that functioned as a kind of internal compass. That word was simply virtue. Not talent. Not success. Not approval. Virtue. The question he asked himself in hard moments was not whether the outcome would be favorable. It was whether his response would be virtuous. Whether it would be the response of a man who had examined his values and was living by them, or whether it would be the response of a man who had surrendered those values to the pressure of the moment. In the context of a woman's silence, that question reframes everything. The question is not whether she comes back. The question is whether you are someone worth coming back to. And the answer to that question is built, brick by brick, in exactly these moments, not the comfortable ones, but the ones that cost you something. The ones where the right thing and the easy thing are pointed in opposite directions, and you choose the right thing anyway. That is where character is made. And character, more than any other single quality, is what a woman who loves deeply is looking for in the man she is deciding whether to trust with all of herself. There is something else that Stoicism illuminates about this dynamic that almost no one discusses. When a man holds his ground in a woman's silence, when he does not chase, does not flood, does not collapse, he is doing something for her as well as for himself. He is giving her the gift of space. Real space. Not manufactured distance or strategic withdrawal. Genuine space for her to move through whatever she is moving through at her own pace. And that kind of space, freely given without resentment or agenda, is one of the most profound expressions of respect one person can offer another. Most men who have been raised on a cultural story about romantic pursuit believe, at some level, that backing off is giving up. That holding still means he does not care enough. That love is demonstrated through persistence, through showing up over and over until she cannot help but respond. But this is a misunderstanding of both love and persuasion. Genuine love is demonstrated through the quality of your presence when you are present, and through the quality of your respect when you step back. A man who gives a woman real space, who trusts her enough to let her process without inserting himself into every moment of that processing, is a man who communicates, without words, that he sees her as a full human being and not as a problem to be solved. Epictetus lived his entire life without conventional power, no title, no property, no political authority. What he had was the authority that no one can take from a man who has earned it through genuine inner work. He had the authority of a man who knows himself. And he taught that this authority, the authority of self-possession, is the most persuasive force available to a human being. Not persuasive in the shallow sense of winning arguments or influencing behavior through manipulation. Persuasive in the deep sense of drawing others toward you through the gravitational field of a genuinely integrated character. A man who is grounded in himself, who is building something real, who knows his values, who holds his composure under pressure, exerts this kind of authority in every relationship he is part of. People are drawn to him. Women who love him find him genuinely difficult to walk away from, not because he is pursuing them, but because his presence, when they are near it, feels like solid ground in a world that is always shifting. You cannot fake this. You cannot perform it. You can only build it. And the building of it is the work of a life, steady, unglamorous, and worth every moment. As we move toward the close of this conversation, there is something that needs to be said plainly. This is not a video about manipulation. It is not a guide to making women chase you. It is not a set of techniques for winning a psychological game. The Stoic Edge is not that kind of channel, and this is not that kind of teaching. What we are talking about, what the philosophy of Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, and Seneca actually points toward, is the becoming of a man who has done enough inner work that manipulation is not only unnecessary but genuinely unappealing to him. Because a man who has built himself does not need to play games. He is the game. He is the standard. And he draws to himself the kind of woman who is serious enough about love to recognize that standard and want to rise to it. That is the promise of this philosophy. Not tricks. Not tactics. Not the shallow victory of making someone chase you. The deep, lasting, genuinely earned satisfaction of being a man who is worth the love he is looking for, and who knows how to hold that love with both strength and grace when it arrives. The silence ends. It always does, one way or another. Either she comes back or she does not. And in both outcomes, the Stoic man finds what he was looking for, not the outcome itself, but the confirmation of his own character inside it. If she comes back, he receives her with warmth and without drama, without the passive resentment of a man who kept score during the quiet. If she does not come back, he absorbs that reality without self-destruction, without the catastrophizing collapse of a man who built his identity on her presence. In both cases, he is the same man. That consistency, that identity that does not require the relationship to be a particular thing in order to remain intact, is the most powerful thing he can offer any relationship he enters. Marcus Aurelius said it plainly and without decoration. It is not what happens to you that determines who you are. It is what you do with what happens to you. The silence was what happened. What you did with it, that is who you are. And who you are, built through the unglamorous daily discipline of Stoic self-mastery, is more than enough. Subscribe to the Stoic Edge right now. Every single video on this channel is built for the man who is done settling for the version of himself that reacts without thinking, collapses without cause, and chases without dignity. Marcus Aurelius, Epictetus, Seneca. These are not names from a history book. They are voices across time speaking directly into the life you are living today, the relationships, the setbacks, the moments of doubt, the tests of character that nobody warned you were coming. This channel is the conversation those voices have been waiting to have with you. Subscribe. Share this with a man who needs it. And come back for the next one, because the work does not stop here. The work is the whole point. And you are already in it. The Stoic Edge. Forged in silence.